she has all of us covered. So Jennifer holds a master's degree in educational leadership from La Crosse. Her passion is supporting child care providers and young families through education and resources to promote student success as they enter school. And in her spare time, she teaches Sunday school, volunteers in the community, and enjoys spending time at the lake with her two children, Derek and Emily. And I think today she's going to just give us an overview of what's happening in Wisconsin and possibly what our centers and schools are facing as we debate and hear about reopening. So Jennifer, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, and I'm so happy to be here, and there's some familiar faces that I've seen throughout the years and then some that are brand new to me, so feel free to ask questions in the chat box as we go along. I'm going to share my screen, so I'm going to get ready to do that and talk while I do that. But I'm really going to talk about what's happening in Wisconsin. I come from Wisconsin, and we've been working on what it looks like to reopen here in Wisconsin recently. We've been in what I would say a state of not knowing for about 3 months, right? And so just maybe if somebody could share with me what you see on your screen. There we go. Hopefully you see a screen that says planning for the future.
Yes.
Excellent. Let's just get the slideshow here. There we go. And it should take up your full screen. So we've been having lots of conversations in Wisconsin about planning for the future and what does it look like. And so this is just my contact information. You are welcome, right, to call me. It doesn't matter what state you're from. I think the more people collaborate and have conversations and have discussions around children and families, the stronger our communities become. And so I think those conversations just need to happen and be ongoing to support everyone. So you can reach me. I do work for a school district. And so sometimes people say, wow, like, how does that tie to the fact that you're a church organization, right? And so the fact is that half of the schools that I work with are in churches. And so even though I work with the school district, we collaborate in the community, and over half my site are churches, all different denominations, but honestly, we have a great relationship and we all work collaboratively together. So to get started, and this is the only screen I'm gonna have up, but I wanna stay on task with what we're talking about. So this is just our overview. We're gonna start with mindset, and to do that, I want you to think about this. And as I have statewide meetings, I sit on multiple committees in our state, from diversity to 4K to leadership positions through the pyramid model and Wisconsin model early learning standards. So as I talk at those different state events, one of the big focuses I always bring to the table is that this is a time of change, right? And we can look at a time of change as a negative, or we can look at it as a positive. And so how I really want us to look at it today is thinking around the lens of families and education. So what changes when we talk about families and education? When we think about what changes, our families change, right? If you think about the community that you're currently living in, is it the same as it was 10 years ago? Is it the same as it was 20 years ago? And you can go back, right? You can go, is it the same as it was 100 years ago, right? Are the same people living there? Are they the same families? And in some situations, we can say that, yeah, some of our communities have only changed a little. Some of our communities have changed a lot, and our families have changed a lot. But how much has education changed? And so if we think of education over the last 10 years, have we made substantial changes? 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, right? We've made subtle changes, but this is a time for us to really look at and empower our families. And I've been in the field of education for 26 years, and that's since I've graduated college, right? Before that, I'm not even counting that. Then it's 30 plus. And in that time, I haven't seen substantial change in education. And I've made changes, but some of those changes are embraced and some of those changes are pushed away, right? We don't need to change this, or we need to change this. And that's when you get that embracement piece, but typically they're not embraced by everyone. What this pandemic has done, right, in my community, in my state, has made us look at, was education really working for our families? And how do we know that? And what does this mean to us? So the first part is getting into planning for that, planning for the future, planning for flexibility. And how do we do that, knowing that education hasn't changed so much? Some of our communities have changed a lot. And our families, right? I think the biggest change I've seen with families has been that where I grew up, in a very rural part of the state, I was surrounded by family. And when I say that, I could drive for 5 miles and I would still be seeing family, right? I was related to everyone I could walk to or bike to. And that, when I moved then to the city, in my neighborhood that I was living in, half of the people that I could walk around the block around weren't even originally from the state and had no family members here, right? Very different, right? If they had a sick child, they couldn't call up grandma or an aunt or an uncle or a close family friend and say, you know what, I need somebody to watch so-and-so because they have the chicken pox, right? When I moved and realized, wow, they didn't have that support system. Many of our families currently don't have that support system in place where they have family around them. And so how do we plan for that flexibility? How do we know what families want? And so how do we get that family input? And that's a piece that we really have to intentionally think about. So I actually work with 12 sites right now and 13 different programs. And when I said, we're going to survey families last month, they're like, oh no, we know our families. I said, yeah, we do. We knew our families pre-stay at home with your kids, right? We knew our families before they realized that things were going to change. How are they feeling now? And so we put a survey out there, not a hard survey, just an easy survey. And the directors, so I called all of our new families, right? Our new families that didn't have a connection to someone already. And then if they had a connection to one of our sites, which was right around 150 families, our families called them, our sites called them or emailed them or reached out via text or whatever worked best for their family and asked these questions. They asked about how they felt about changes in class size. They asked if they had any questions when their child either is already at school or coming back to school. We typically don't ask personal questions, but I really felt that I needed to. And so I said, I really want you to ask a question and say, is there someone in your immediate family that is immune compromised or at high risk where you don't feel comfortable sending your 4-year-old to school because of that situation? And then I asked them if they had technology in their home, if they have internet or Wi-Fi access, and if they can receive an email or download an app. So super easy questions. Then I really reached out to them and said, you know what? We really want to collaborate with you. We want this to be a positive experience. We know that there's been a lot of change, but we want your input. And so we're not answering the questions, we're just writing them down, and we're going to get you the questions as we have more defined answers. And they were just, I think, grateful. I think that's the word, right? Grateful that we wanted to know more, that we wanted to understand where their family was, and understanding that their family may be different than it was even 2 months ago, and how they're feeling about things, and that their feelings may change, right? I think that was the message I got loud and clear too, is like, this is the way I feel today, but I don't know that I'm going to feel this way next week. And we have to understand that that's where some of our families are at. So that family input, that survey really helped us drive, what does it look like for reopen? What does it look like? So I have sites that have been open through the whole thing. I have 3 sites that have been open the whole entire time, 4 sites that have been open for a majority of the time out of the 12. And even they ask the questions because their families are feeling different as we've gone through different phases. And so then I really put a focus on the communication and the relationship. So many of you are going to receive new families, and those are the families that either what I consider legacy families already there, and new families are the ones that we reached out to. And how do we build that, know how that family wants to communicate, and how do we build those relationships? And how do we build those relationships when we're not face to face? How do we build those relationships and gain that trust when it seems like everywhere is different, and from place to place is different, and many families have different family in different states, and everybody's operating differently in their state and their county, and so that's confusing for families. And so the more open we can give them and the more input they have, right, the more empowered they feel. So that survey helped us. And then I met with the directors after that survey. And I've also met with some of our state leaders as well, and said, we need to use this time. We have families that love having their children home. We have families that love their children but would like them at school. We have families that are overwhelmed and frustrated and just want to cry, right? And some of them did just cry, right? They just wanted they needed to cry, and they needed somebody to hear them that it's that rough. And then we have families that just want things to go back to normal because that's what feels comfortable to them. And we need to take this opportunity, right? That right now, all of our families, for the most part, are engaged at a different level with their children. And they're also seeing their children from another lens. They're seeing some of the stuff that their teachers were saying that they were like, what? My child doesn't do that. Magically has happened at their house, right? And they're like, whoa, no way. Some have seen amazing growth, and some have seen behaviors that they never thought were ever possible because of they never really had their child for that amount of time, especially for full day children in childcare. So my message, and if this is the only thing you hear today, it's all I want you to walk away with, okay, is it is a time for change. And it's a time to empower families, that they are the most important educator of their child's life. And that we have the ability right now to empower them, to collaborate with them, to communicate effectively with them, to make a difference in education and what it looks like in the future. And how do we do that? So one way, and I, like, again, right, 30 years of experience or more. And this taught me these 2 things. I am amazing, right, at telling families what I do with their child and why I do it. So the what and the why, I got it, but I haven't been telling them how. So I tell them what they do during their day, why we do it during the day, but not how we do it. So when they were with their child, the how was challenging. How do I do this? How do you do this at school? And I should have done that, right? I shouldn't have hid that, and I didn't purposely do it at all. It was a reflection piece. And we have this opportunity to share it all with the family. And it's not that they have to be their only educator. It's not that they're in this alone. It's that we're in it together for one sole purpose of supporting their family and their child to be successful, lifelong learners. So where do we have to begin, right? We need family input, just like I talked about, right? We need the survey. We need to know how they're feeling. We need to communicate effectively with them and tell them everything. As a state, we always had this saying that we take children no matter where they're at. And we said that confidently for 24 years of my life, right? It didn't matter what anybody said, where their child was. We're like, we take your child no matter where they're at. We are going to help them grow. Except for, and that is all true, except for we never told them what we expected them to their child to do in the beginning in Wisconsin, right? It was kind of like the resources were out there, but you had to be educated to find them. And then you had to be educated to figure out what they actually meant in translation. So we need to be upfront with our families about what that is. What are the standards, those early learning standards in your state? Where are they? What do they mean? How do they access them? And how do we use those to build the child's portfolio? So then we have to go into class size and flexibility, right? So right now, we are at a place where a child may attend school face-to-face. A child may be quarantined for 14 days or more if they've had exposure or their family has. In our state, a child has to be fever-free right now for 72 hours, which just everybody that's a director or owner should just take a big gasp with that, because we had a hard time keeping children home for 24. Now we're at 72. Like I've taken lots of deep breaths about that. Like, that sounds really great. Well, the families have patience for that. But the reality is they're going to feel like they need to work. So how are we going to balance this? How are we going to make a safe environment and meet all of these new guidelines? And the key is flexibility, right? We have to be flexible. We have to think about what that flexibility looks like. So we also know that they're paying us many times for their children to be with us and be that educator. So how do we know how many families want to stay home because they don't feel safe? So I'll give you a great example. My cousin, right, was diagnosed with leukemia, had a bone marrow transplant. Her children can't be exposed, right? She's at too high of risk. So the only way she can see her children is if they're not exposed. So her children need to stay home. She is totally willing to have a teacher help her homeschool her children and to go through virtual learning because she wants her children to be with her. There's other children that have heart conditions that have the best. This is one that many of my directors didn't think about. I did because of how close I am with my family, but so 5 families out of the 140 I called said, we're going to keep our child home from school and are willing to go virtual because we want our children to see their grandparents. So, and I said back to them, I hear you. So how are we going to do that? And they're like, we want our child to have an face-to-face experience, but we want to spend Christmas and Easter and their birthday with them. And I said, what if we could make an experience that you could go quarantine for 14 days to be safe for them? So you could have your in-person experience. You could be out for 14 days, but just follow learning at home. You could see your grandparents and come right back into learning. Does that work for you? And they're like, that'd be great. So we have to think about that. We have to think about how many families we have in that situation. How many families we could have flexing in and out of our classrooms because they're learning at home or they're learning at school. I have situations with 3 families that their grandparents are their primary caregivers while their parents work. If they come to school, they automatically are going to expose possibly their fragile grandparents. And so they're totally willing to go virtual and just have their teacher communicate with them through virtual means, right? And what does that mean for me? So just so we understand virtual means for me, virtual does not mean that they sit on the computer and they learn via watching a screen. I actually don't believe in screen time like that. So the reason I asked on my question if they have email access and access to download an app is because I would say that my children in my program spend a max of 20 minutes a day that it would be required to be screen time. And that's really the teacher check-in with them. So when I do the teacher check-in with my classroom, I make a YouTube video every morning and I say, good morning, everybody. It's Tuesday. I'm so glad you came to see me today. And we talk about our feelings. We talk about what the weather's like outside. We talk about what activities they're going to see today and that I can't wait to see them tomorrow. They get a YouTube video where we read them a story. And then I have an app that I use for the family to be able to access the lessons that the family sees and they deliver to the child. And it works. Right? It works. And so there's lots of different ways you can do that. But so when I say virtual, it's really face-to-face with their caregiver, whoever their caregiver is at home. And I have some families that listen to the book on YouTube, and I have some families that read the same book at home. And they have that choice. If they have it available, they don't need to listen to YouTube. If they don't have it available, they can listen to it online. And having that flexibility is something that we're all going to have. And I feel like all states are in that situation. And so we have some states that are open more than other states, but our regulations, even though they're different in all states, I took my most, I would say, harshest, that's not the word I'm trying to use, but strict regulations. And that's what I based all my information off of. So I lowered my class size for 4-year-olds down to 20. I made it so that we could have that 20 into 2 groups of 10 that doesn't cross-contaminate during the day. And I have a virtual component that we can go to at any time. None of those decisions take more than 5 minutes to change. And the teachers have to be prepped for that and know that all those changes, right? Then you go into curriculum. What curriculum can they have all the resources at home that they do at school? So it's definitely not Pinterest, right? Because when we think about that, that becomes very time consuming for teachers to search for things that families have at home and that they have at school. And so this is where this group is beautiful and awesome because you can collaborate with each other and be like, oh, what are you using? How does that work? I currently use Creative Curriculum. I'm not their salesperson, but their curriculum does a beautiful job equity-wise of being, they can do it at home or school. I've taught during this time 2 units in full using Creative Curriculum and had no problem making that transition between home and school. And then my bigger, in the place I'm at right now, is what app empowers families to really own their child's portfolio. And so if their child, so just think about this from, put on your parent lens or your family lens. Think of how empowering that is for a family member to invite the teacher in and share their child's portfolio. That family gets to actually be part of that documentation of their child's learning. And that together, right, we can do amazing things and have a really strong and self-confident and a child that, right, is resilient and knows that they have all this support around them and that the family also has that support. And so I'm still in the planning process. I don't have it all figured out. It's what I'm doing right now. But collaborating with your peers, collaborating with different groups around you, right? Having people ask those really, the one thing I've said, and my time is running short right now, but the one thing I've said is I need people to ask me the hard questions, not just listen to me and be like, wow, I wonder how we do that. Like, did you think about this? Because the only way we're going to get a plan that's really going to work for families is for directors and owners and different people to really ask challenging, powerful, hard questions so that we don't miss something, right? And I ask my families to think about questions. I ask my directors to think about questions. I ask people in the state, like, what am I missing, right? What are those components? What are those barriers we have when we empower families to be in that, right? In that, we always say you want to work in a triangle, right? With the school, the family, and the child. But the fact of the matter is that we say that, but as I've been looking for apps and I've been looking for programming, many of our programs do just what I said. They tell them families what and why we do things, but not the how. And so how can we make that a change in our future? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to open it back up if anybody has questions.
Jennifer, thank you so much. All of your wisdom and experience. I want to open this up for questions. If on the screen, let's see how many we've got, 30. I think you'll have to unmute yourself and then go ahead and please ask, what questions or what was triggered in your mind or another example that you might want to share.
Jennifer, this is Joanne from Minnesota. You are looking at apps. Have you zeroed in on one or two that you think might do the job?
Yeah, so I have been looking at apps all week last week. So I've spent, I don't know, about 12 hours on with salespeople. But so my sites are currently using Tadpole. One site is using Tadpoles. 3 sites are using Brightwheel, and all the others are using free apps. And so I actually talked to Brightwheel. I talked to Tadpoles, and those are the 2. So Tadpoles aligns with creative curriculum. So there's a piece of that. Brightwheel has, I would say, more options out there, and they update more often than Tadpoles does right now from what I've heard, right? Like, this is me learning. And so, and I would be open if somebody else is using one, right? The biggest pieces for me is that the portfolio is with the child, and I can transfer different, like I can add the family, I can add the teachers, I can change that, and the portfolio is still ongoing. But I would be open if somebody knows another one. Thank you. That's a great question.
Thank you. Other questions?
Oh, has anyone heard of Story Park? That's an app. I just wondered if anyone had experience with it. It could be more international. My son teaches in Singapore, and they use Story Park, and I, as a grandparent, can access it as well. And I see their videos, and they're part of, I see a lot that goes on through the teachers, and I just wondered if anyone had experience with it, but maybe not so much. Okay.
Is that Story Park, P-A-R-K?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna look that up. That's interesting. So I just saw a question about Seesaw run across too. So our district uses Seesaw K5. Seesaw actually has, so Seesaw is so currently I'm using Ready Rosie, which is attached to creative curriculum, right? So It aligns to creative curriculum. And so our families have enjoyed that piece of it and seen videos. It doesn't currently attach to all of the other components of creative curriculum. And so they're working on that behind the scenes. Seesaw itself would take it's not made for early childhood. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And so if you even read their website, they're not. So what we don't want is just to add an app. So just think about this at your sites that you're currently at. We don't want to add an app to add more work. And this is where I'm running into issues, right? So if we have to take temperatures and we have to be doing face-to-face with students to check them in and out, I want it all to be in the same place. Seesaw doesn't. When I talked to Seesaw, they didn't have the same capabilities as the other two that I mentioned. And so that's an obstacle all in its own, right? Is to how many of those pieces, the other piece that currently Brightwheel does is that they actually have a way of signing children in without touching the screen to sign in. And so we have to be always thinking about the fact that what are those new challenges? Like some states have to write down the temperature every morning before children enter the building. Currently, we need to do that, and we need to mark them down. Some apps give you that capability. So just thinking about how we do some of those things and what's going to make it easier for you and your staff. All those have big fees with them, though. That's the other piece about it.
Yes. Yeah.
Someone asked about Bloomz, Bloomz.
Yep. So I have a site that currently uses Bloomz. It just doesn't give you as much flexibility, right? And so the other piece, so many of you are private, or not, you're affiliated with churches, so you don't have, it's not like a corporation where you have multiple locations. I do have multiple locations, so I oversee right over 1,000 students in our community, birth to 5. It's slightly over that. And so in order for me to push stuff out, Bloomz doesn't have the capacity to push things out like that, where I can actually push out and see what individual sites are doing. So if you were all individual sites, I wouldn't be able to see what's happening or what that correspondence in your sites are, or to push out a newsletter to all of you unless I went into each of your accounts. And so that's another piece where I have to look more broad. Bloomz has some great features. I don't know that it has the ability to build those portfolios over time with the family's input that I've really been searching for, because I didn't look really in depth to it because it doesn't give me some of those other capabilities because of how big we are.
Other questions or comments or resources you want to share?
Can we change the subject? I have lots of questions on different.
Sure.
Okay. I just wonder, as we think of reopening, we are not open. How are you entering and exiting your students? And thoughts on getting them into the building and out? Is it any different than it was?
It's actually very different. So currently, yes. So we're open. So some of my sites have been open. So we actually have drop off at the front door or at whatever door. So we actually have multiple doors so that we never have a line of people dropping their child off. So we have a max family entrance of 50 students. And so otherwise we have to have another entrance that doesn't cross over in the building. And so we also, and this is easier when you have full day programs where your families are staggered when they come in. So we have staggered starts. We have multiple entrances for the children so that we're not contaminating another part of the building. And we're picking up at the door, so we actually have to have an extra staff member at the door taking students to classrooms, and they can only take a student to a classroom in that part of the building. And then same for pickup. So we do the same thing at pickup time.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes, other comments or questions, and feel free to change this topic. I think Jennifer has experience in lots of areas here.
I'm going to keep asking questions. Okay, is regarding supplies. We typically buy supplies for the students, but now we will need individual supplies. How have you gone forward with that? We could still buy the individual supplies and look at that differently. I just wonder how others are thinking of that as we move forward.
I can share what we're doing and other people can chime on. So this is something I'm working on like literally tomorrow all day, is the fact that we've always done where everybody shared markers and crayons and, you know, and then we sanitize the best you can. So we really thought about whatever they need at school, they really do need at home in a way, if we're really going to truly go back and forth. So my first thought, and this is my first thought, right, is that our school supply list should be for their home resources that we would like them to have at home, and that the school would purchase the resources for school and individualize, because of the fact that we don't want multiple people like sanitizing. So we use handwrite without tears. We always do that in a small group setting. And so we've really thought about like, how do we change that? Because buying whole class sets of 20 is a huge expense at a time when there's really not money there. So we've thought about the fact that we could put heavy tag and make the wood pieces on that. And, you know, and if a child needs the wood pieces, we can give them those as an accommodation. So I think we have to think really outside the box about how children can have their individual sets of things, how they might not have as much, but how they have the same materials at home as well. And so they might have just a small box with their crayons, their scissors, their pencils, right? But then they also have those same materials at home. It's a great question. It's one I'm pondering every day.
I have a question. So if your children need to be at home, how are you charging tuition? Is it?
Yeah, so it has varied. So we have, you know, you have that, your families are all in different situations. So we've had some sites that have actually, they just dropped their rate during the time that the families were home to $50 a week, and they pushed out those lessons to families. And so the families still felt like they were getting support, and they actually were okay with that because they were getting that support from the teacher. We had some families that had already budgeted it and just paid the whole thing this whole entire time. And didn't complain about it because they wanted their teachers to be there for them. They wanted the lessons. They knew that many of them were working from home. And so it was really helpful to have those lessons for their students. And then we have had some that have had stopped paying and actually unenrolled, right? And the teachers have still been reaching out to them because we need to figure out how we're going to help support them. And so I think that this is a piece of why we called families to see where they were at, what they needed. And my goal in the future, so social emotional development is, like, I can't speak about social emotional development enough with our youngest learners, right? That's where everything is at. those academic pieces all come if socially, emotionally children are ready for that. And so because of that, that social emotional piece, really, that face-to-face is super important, right? Learning those social emotional skills on a video doesn't really work so well. And so we have to give children experiences. So my goal is that we're flexible enough to be able to go to groups of 10, groups of 20 with our 4-year-olds, to still give them that face-to-face as much as we possibly can in a safe environment. And when they need to go online or virtual, we have that flexibility with our families. And for our families that cannot do that, right, that need to stay home, I do think there's a good number of those families that if you don't offer that experience, they're going to pay somebody else to give them that experience. That's what I know from my survey. They want somebody to support them. So the more we can support them, and when you think especially of churches, what a great community to be supporting those families, right? They have you and they have that church community. So I think there's going to be a lot of demand for that. I have a lot of people saying right now, like, if you don't offer this, we're going to go virtual with a different place, because they want the support.
It sounds like, Jennifer, from what you were, how you opened with the different options, that there are those that are going to have their children at home and basically want a homeschool teacher, that's managing and supporting the home, that's going to be part of that, like a menu of services, really, that they're paying for a homeschool teacher or this flexible option. I mean, I have a nephew that homeschools, but once a week, they go to a group, setting for that, an outdoor group experience. So again, I love your idea of flexibility. I'm looking at some of the questions. One is, how did you do the survey? And can you clarify, did you say that you kept 4-year-olds at 20 kids per class, not 10?
Yeah, so 10, so the whole class is 20. So my classrooms are big enough that I could actually have classrooms of 20 and break them into a classroom of 2 classrooms of 10 when I need to change because of guidelines changing based on where the state is at. So Wisconsin is going through phases of how they're reopening and closing. And so depending on the phase depends on what my ratios need to be and what group size can be. So we've set the classes up that we could have a class of 24-year-olds, but we could also break that class down into 2 groups of 10, either in the same room or in rooms like adjacent to each other, where the children are still getting that face-to-face experience, just in a different group size, but with the same teachers. And then your other question
is, how did you do the survey? Did you use what platform did you use?
Yep. So we always survey our families when they enter the program, if they prefer email or if they prefer phone conversations or writing things down. And so for this particular survey, if they were a family, we knew that information. We actually used whatever mode they appreciate the most. For our new families, I actually had a conversation with them on the phone. And to be honest with you, my preference was that most families, we did that because, one, we want to know our families are okay, right? And so last year I had 354-year-olds in my program. It took me almost 8 weeks to finally reach every single one of the kids to make sure their family was okay. And that was with text, emails, phone calls. And so I really introduced the conversation as the fact that I wanted to make sure they were okay, right? And that their family was okay and that they didn't need anything. And then we talked about what next year might look like. And so if I didn't reach them via phone, I typically emailed them after that. And if I didn't receive an email, typically I went to text if I didn't know the family well.
Thank you. Shirley, I realize that I may have cut you off earlier. Did you have a follow-up question for Jennifer?
we're struggling with how to pay the teachers through all this. Right now, we are doing a lot of Zooms and all that with the kids, but in July we lose our PPP, and what are we going to do to keep? I can't pay them all.
So so the grants have been great in our state. We actually, but they're going to run out, just like you said. I told all of our directors they needed to do whatever was going to give those teachers the most flexibility and the most money. And so we do have teachers that are on furlong already. This is where, so my sites are in a partnership with the district. And so we pay for the 4-year-olds to be at their site. And so we paid them their contract year. We'll do the same thing next year. And so the more partnerships you can have, right, where money is coming in from other sources, it becomes a little bit easier in that situation. But it's something where we may have teachers on furlong, and then we have to think about how like, does the director's role change? So the director's role did change in the ones that their teachers went on furlong for whatever reason. Some of them had medically fragile, family members, or for multiple different reasons. They went on furlong, and then the director actually had to do that responsibility of reaching out to families, making sure they were okay, communicating with them. And so I think in every situation it's different. I think we're going to have to think on our feet quickly to figure out, can we bring in a group of, families that are looking for support for a different allotment of money? And then can we look at our families that need, quote unquote, to be face to face, and how do we divvy that up with our staff so that we have enough money coming in to support the teachers to stay employed? Our sites are they're not at 50% capacity. They're losing money every day right now. And so we're also, right, I advocate for the state that this isn't sustainable. And we all have to advocate that the current plan that's put in many states right now is not sustainable for you to, as a business, stay afloat. So we can think outside the box, but we also have to be advocates saying this isn't really feasible and possible. So how can you collaborate with others? How can you look at modifying what you do to give that virtual experience component to families that are looking for that? And how can you think about what those ratios are and how you can support the staff that you currently have? And that's a dilemma.
We have time for one more question before we close with our devotion today.
Jennifer, I have just a really quick question. Are your groups of 10 in Wisconsin? Is that correct, that you can be at?
So that's been our most strict guideline, yes.
Okay, so when you do a class of 10, is it 9 children and 1 teacher? I know it's a nitpicky question.
Nope, it's 10 students, 1 teacher, and the teacher has to be the same the whole entire time they're there.
Okay, so, okay, all right, thank you.
Yep.
That was a quick question. Is there one more?
Well, I have another question. You have your teachers doing virtual learning as well as classroom? So they're doing is it the same teacher doing the virtual classroom as the classroom itself?
How do we do that for extended care?
Nope. So we've split that up, right? Because of the ratios the way they are right now. So we had typically in the past, we've had 2 teachers, 24 students for 4-year-olds, and I'm only giving you 4-year-old ratios right now. And so because we're down on class size and we're only at 50%, one of those teachers is really focusing on the students in the class, and the other teacher's working and giving feedback on the virtual piece of that.
Thank you.
Before we close, Jennifer, would you mind if you're willing to receive, questions or, after we end, could you put in the best way to contact you in the chat box, either an email or a phone, whichever you prefer. So thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you. You were great.
Brent, Pastor Brent, we're going to ask you to close us with a devotion and prayer today.
All right, it's great to be with you today, Jennifer. Excellent, both thoughts and questions. I think you provoke a whole host of very well-rounded thinking. There's a lot of that remains in there that is unclear at this time, I think, for many of us, as we try to navigate and anticipate what is a strange time. And so in thinking about that, I selected a reading from Second Sunday of Advent, which is coming, and that seeks to anticipate and help us in our thoughts. And it comes from Isaiah 11. And I think it speaks to us about something that we all need. And from beginning at verse 2, it says, "The Spirit of the Lord shall rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord." Something that we could all benefit from is wisdom and insight and understanding that indeed comes from the best of sources as we try to weigh finances, try to weigh regulations around health, on class size, on ways in which we register and send students home, the ways that we are flexible and nimble in an ever-changing time. And it ends in verse 6 with these words, "And the wolf shall live with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the lion and the fatling together." In other words, things that would normally be adversarial are now working out in some new partnerships. And it ends with this thought, "And a little child shall lead them." We understand that as Christians in pointing the way in Advent towards Christ. I share a story of Cindy, who was waking up one Sunday morning as a mom with her daughter Jenna, who was 5, and out of the blue, as a family who had never, a single parent family of 2, that had never ventured out to a church, Jenna said to her mom, "I want to go to church, whatever that is, Mom." And so wherever that thought came from, she was in a secular preschool, but somewhere this thought entered her mom's mind, and it provoked Cindy, who at one time herself had been to Sunday school, to think about, wow, what does this mean? And the thought that popped into her mind was verse 6, "And a little child shall lead them." It was a verse she had learned as a kid. And she went, whoa, here is my daughter Jenna bringing me back to something in my own childhood. And for them, it started an adventure of discovering faith together, life together. It's what we aspire to do in our preschools, in our early childhood centers, is to, in some way, open up the minds and the hearts of the kids, right? And that God would give us that wisdom, insight, and understanding in this COVID-19 time to be able to figure out how we manage what states are saying, how we manage the finances, how we manage our space, how we manage best our staff that we want to continue to hold on to and to provide for, because it's so essential in these families' livelihood. And so we seek God's wisdom and insight this day. And thank you again for the opportunity to be part of this conversation. Let me close with that prayer from Second Sunday Advent for us. Stir up our hearts, Lord God, to prepare the way of your only Son. By his coming, nurture our growth as people in your peace through Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord. Grant us wisdom, insight, and understanding that only Christ our Lord can give. Together with the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. God bless you, my friends.
Thank you, Brent. I want to just thank all of you on the call today. You're right up there with all the first responders in my mind. I tell people all the time, as a board member, that I'm just so inspired by the work that all of you and the dedication that you are giving to the kids and to the families that you serve. So thank you so much. So this was recorded today. It'll be put up on the, you'll have access to that. Melanie will be summarizing as she does so well. And we'll list on the Facebook page or on the website, there's an ongoing list every week of the resources that we're hearing about from our speakers. And again, just thank you, Jennifer. A question appeared kind of at the last minute here about mask. We have a minute to spare here. Does your state of Wisconsin, are you requiring mask in the classroom?
So luckily our licensing guidelines for our youngest learners realize that that's very difficult. We've had a parent actually ask if we were going to have all the children wear shields. So, you know, if families are heightened and so some of our teachers do wear masks. It depends on the guidelines at their individual sites and by the feedback from their families. I think this is another great family question. The reality is the research out there right now that I've currently read and I'm hearing from the CDC is for young children to wear masks. It's actually, they're touching them. It's not helpful. They're leaving them on the tables. They're leaving them on the floor, which actually just is a contamination problem. And so, so when those questions come up, we have to either search for the answers or find the answer, right, of why we're not doing it or why we're doing it. And then if you are doing that, you have to know that there are things that we really have to be alert about, like them touching their mask, it's a false sense of reality. So many times when this happened, people said, well, I'm wearing gloves and I'm wearing a mask, but then I would watch them like literally touch their face and touch something and then touch their face. And I'm like, gloves are a one-time shot, people. So we have to think about that, right? And a lot of it is educating who we serve. And so keep that in mind, right? I think whatever you choose, as long as you're saying how you keep children safe and you have family feedback and input, you're going to do just great things. You're going to do great things.
I'm thinking that children with masks, that they'll think they're superheroes. You know, they get to decorate them and they're ready to go out and save the world. So again, thank you, everyone. And if you have any questions, you know that Corey and Melanie are always here. And we have Beth with the ambassadors. So, and our board, as a board member, we're here to serve as well. So if you have any questions at all, please let us know. But thank you again, and God's blessings as you go forward this week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.